Uh-oh, something's wrong. It's not working. You hate it. Problems galore. Ugly, ugly, ugly. What do you do? Just keep painting. No, seriously, just keep painting. Don't stop. Don't stop. Really, they shouldn't stop. Hello there, minders. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Well, today you're going to get into my mind a little bit. All right, first of all, let me just tell you that I'm using Kilimanjaro watercolor paper. It's their spiral bound journal. This is the one in particular where they intersperse sketch pages between the watercolor paper so you can do your sketches and then do the painting if you want. I'll have a link to what that book is, where it is. It's a Cheap Joe's only product, so we'll put that in the description. But what I really want to talk about is this little journey that I went on. This is exploratory, and I'm going to be an explorer, and you're going to explore with me. And some of this I had no intention necessarily of making a video about, particularly this process right here. Now, let me just tell you what I'm doing, what was in my head. So this is called automatic drawing. Not by me, this is what someone else has called it. And I'll show you a great example of that. There is on the Proco site, there's a guy that does a demonstration. Now, he does it so that there's not anything in particular being drawn. It's just a good way to loosen your arm up, to put expression in your strokes, kind of tickle your pencil technique, how you hold the pencil, how you get it to do different things. I've done it before, not very often, but I really was trying to come up with some very calligraphic and interesting linear strokes. Ones that hopefully I could transfer to painting. Well, that's where the rub comes in, but hang with me here as we explore this little bit of wilderness. You know, I will just add as a sidebar, you can explore anything you want. I mean, in any way that you want. You do not have to be tied to here's how you do it conversations. Here's the best process conversations. Let me just say, if you're learning how to become a really good watercolorist or artist in general, you need to explore. You need to get out there in that wilderness and maybe blaze some trails. And all I was doing here is trying to blaze a trail on mark making. And I kind of, as you'll see here, I kind of got tighter and tighter. I went from drawing almost nothing to doing very specific landscape forms. What I ended up with was drawing sections of these little sketches without lifting my pencil. Now, it's sped up, so you're seeing me lift the pencil a good bit, but I will go through a significant area without lifting my pencil and just keep a continuous line. And that really yielded some very interesting results, which I will be revisiting. And I might be doing probably a tutorial on this later for patrons, since usually that's where my drawing tutorials end up. But back to the main goal, and that was to see how these loose, expressive strokes with a pencil might yield some ideas for how to treat watercolor with a brush, some calligraphic strokes. And when people talk about calligraphic strokes, they're talking about strokes that look linear and like writing. Calligraphy just means beautiful writing. So when you hear an artist talk about, I want to get some calligraphic strokes in there, they're usually talking about a linear brush that looks linear when it applies the strokes. It looks almost like writing, scribbles, loops, expressive lines and shapes. Really didn't know how this would translate to watercolor and watercolor brushes. Spoiler alert, it didn't really translate very well, at least not in this session. And let me just add this. When you explore, you're not necessarily breaking new ground for the whole universe of watercolor painters and artists. You're breaking ground for yourself. I cannot overemphasize that. You've got to break ground for yourself. It could be a process and a technique that's been written about in 100 different books. But if you haven't experienced it, you haven't broken that ground for yourself. That's where discovery comes in. So I really enjoyed this pencil session. And immediately as I started on a watercolor, and we have 2 watercolors here that I'll do, I thought, well, how best to start that? So I grabbed a watercolor pencil, an Albrecht Dürer warm gray watercolor pencil. I thought, oh, that's a logical way to start. Right away, I was not happy with how it was going. I don't know if I stiffened up. I don't think the color was right. The texture of the paper wasn't giving me the same smooth lines, and I'm thinking already I'm kind of becoming a little bit dissatisfied. Anyway, I went ahead and put down a few lines and then started toning them and thinking, yeah, not really going to do anything. So I reverted to some of my usual spontaneous painting techniques, splashing and spattering and spraying the paint and just seeing what shapes and all emerged. And I got some pretty interesting composition going here. I decided to turn this piece into an interesting design, compositional design. That'll be a little more apparent as we get further along. But here you can see I was not giving up on the calligraphic expressive brush stroke idea. So I brought out this wedge, which I did a recent video on, wedges and daggers, if you want to go watch that, and just started getting calligraphic and expressive and just really not thinking a whole lot about the process as a watercolor. Well, it turned ugly pretty quick.
Boo! Boo!
And it just wasn't working. Not in my book. Did I just ruin this? But here's part of the lesson for today is keep on painting. If you think you've ruined something, keep on painting. Maybe if it's still real wet, blot it a little bit, let it dry, then start again and focus on what trails you're blazing, what you're learning, what information you're going to take away from this process that's going to benefit you in the next painting. So valuable. Don't just say, failed, trash it, start again. You're not helping yourself when you do that. So I kept on painting. Yeah, it looks like one of my typical spontaneous paintings, but I was not unhappy with it. And in the end, I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the composition. And if nothing else, this is a study for a larger painting, a design sense that spoke to me. I mean, it harkens back to my graphic design days. I love design, and I've always called design composition on steroids. Composition is design, but when you focus on composition as design, it takes on even more intricate and interesting aspects. Shape, graphic, abstracts, the way shapes interact. It's not just composition, which sometimes gets simplified to, I'll place this here, I'll place this here. So yeah, pretty happy with this one. Glad I pushed through. I nearly stopped. In landscape number 2, I am still not giving up on that calligraphic stroke. So.
This looks strangely familiar. It's because we've been here before.
So I just had a bunch of greens that were still on part of my palette from the muted greens episode I did. This was actually my last episode. So if you want to see what greens these are and how I made these greens, you can go look at that video. But I had a lot of these greens out. Just, let's just do something with a lot of greens. And I added a little bit of purple in here, Dioxizine Purple, tiny bits of transparent red iron oxide. I was getting swirly. I was trying to keep from lifting my brush, kind of imitate what I had been doing with the pencil. I had no idea where I was going with this. And sometimes you just don't. Actually, a lot of times when it's spontaneous painting. But again, it really quickly reached an ugly stage. I was getting pretty frustrated at this point, and I thought, let's see if I can paint it as a tree line with a nice foreground. Boy, I'm so glad I did. I mean, it's not that this ends up being a beautiful painting. What it turned into very quickly, and you've got to be very flexible when you're exploring, when you're blazing new trails for yourself. What this quickly turned into was an edge study, edges and transitions. Shape design for sure, because you have a lot of tree and foliage shapes, but how the shapes and edges of those various foliage forms transition and work on top of or next to each other. I did a whole video on that. I talk about it in other videos, but learning and practicing your transitions is really, really very important. And I had a ton of them in here. This was like a sampler for edge transitions. A lot of hard edges, a lot of edges that I wanted to kind of transition into other areas a little more softly. And a study like this, again, it's not about did it succeed or did it not succeed. It's about what did I learn? What was interesting about this one is I had a whole lot more hard edges than I would normally put into a painting. Because of the way I started with those expressive strokes on that wedge, it's like I had a ton of shapes surrounded by crisp, hard edges. And I mean, one of the lessons I learned is, yeah, you can do that. You can actually make those work. That's a lesson. That's a lesson for me. You know, a 40-year plus watercolor painter, some of the best lessons I've learned have been in only the last few years where I've allowed myself to be spontaneous. Don't forget that. If I can ever pass anything on to you, it would be that. You will never stop learning, and usually the more experienced you get, the more you'll realize you're learning. So keep on painting. Keep on painting. Be flexible as to your original purpose, what you were trying to do. Value discovery, which I define as learning for yourself, not discovering something brand new. Value that like you value nothing else. Treasure it because it will make you the better painter. Try and fail loops. Do not. Not unless you problem solve. Not unless you blaze some trails, practice, push through the ugly phases, and then look at something, succeed or fail, as a beautiful gallery of awesome lessons. Hope that inspires you. Keep painting.
Just keep swimming, swimming, swimming.
Keep painting. Keep painting. And keep learning. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this. Talk to you in the next video.